Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the answer here in 2030 is not quite, at least so far. A season after winning a shocking World Series championship, we are 34 and 44, fourth place in the AL West, 13 games out, and we rank 25th out of 30 teams in the latest power rankings. So things are not going well as we approach the midway point of the season. We do hopefully have some help coming soon. YME943 and NS1CLRK have both suggested that we cut our losses and start selling. I'm not quite at that point yet, and part of the reason why is that we've had some bad luck with injuries. Paul West brought this up in comments to our last episode, but we are in a situation where we haven't gotten much of anything out of two key players this year. Our starting catcher, Drake Baldwin, has been injured since early in spring training, but he has only got another 5 days of recovery left, and then we can get him on a rehab assignment. So my hope is that we'll have him back in the next 10 or so days. And as Paul kind of alluded to in the comment, hopefully he'll be able to help improve our pitching staff with his really good defense, and hopefully also give us a little boost offensively. And Chase DeLauder, and all he did last year was win the World Series for us, the third World Series champion of his career, and he was both the ALCS and the World Series MVP. And we've only gotten 17 at-bats from him this season. Injured on April 8th, had a setback from that partially torn labrum, and he's going to be out most of the rest of the year. Maybe we'll get him back in mid-September. So we've basically been without two pretty important starters for all but 17 at-bats this year. So although we're 10 games under 500, which is incredibly disappointing, I want to see if we can pull things together a little bit over the next 3 weeks or so. And then if things are looking even worse than they do today as we approach the trade deadline, might be a little bit more willing to sell. There are definitely some arbitration eligible players who we're going to need to get off the books next year. You can see our salary situation next year is expected to increase by over $30 million. So we're certainly going to be sellers at some point. You think about guys like DeLauder, Rincon, honestly, even Mason Black, Cameron Cawley, Jackson Ferris, all guys scheduled to be making $6, $7, $8 million next year. Mason Miller and Colt Keith also in the same situation, but those guys aren't arbitration eligible. Would certainly think about trading some of those arbitration eligible players away if things completely fall apart on us over the next few weeks. Maybe it's before the trade deadline. If not, I think they'll likely still have some value for teams looking to have them for a full year, or in some cases 2 or 3 years if we look to trade them this offseason as well. So I'm taking that recommendation under advisement, but I don't necessarily feel like there's anyone that we just need to dump because we've got control over most of these guys. Now, we could say something different potentially about MJ Melendez, J.D. Davis, and Hunter Brown, who we signed as minor league free agents and are all just on one-year deals. But none of those players are having particularly good seasons for us at this point, and none of those players are going to have a ton of trade value. So I get the point to maybe dump some guys, but we don't have a ton of talent that's in the last year of their contract, which is going to make me likely a little more patient with this team, feeling like if I wait to trade away a Rincon or a Cauley or even maybe a Ferris, I'll still be able to likely get 95% of what I would have gotten for them before the trade deadline if I trade them this coming November, December. Might not be quite that high, but the premium that teams pay for rentals compared to what they just pay for players in general, to me, doesn't seem all that significant in the game. So I don't think we lose a ton by waiting. NS1 CLRK did mention specifically trading Bubba Chandler, who is certainly having a pretty rough year following a Cy Young Award and the World Series title last year. 4-8 record, has gotten the ERA down to 4.28, which is sadly a small amount of progress. Been pretty close to a league average pitcher in terms of his ERA plus, bit below average in terms of his FIP minus, but he's straightening out the season a bit. Don't love that he's developed some less than stellar personality traits, but he's still signed to a relatively reasonable contract. If I get a great offer for him, I'd certainly be willing to move on from him. That said, he's only going to be 28 next year, so I think he still has some value to us. And while we're thinking about contracts and potential trades in the future of the team, even though I'm not willing to throw in the towel on this season quite yet, take a quick look at Jake Ortega, our first-round pick from last year. We promoted him up to AAA Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. Been respectable there, hitting 286 with a 91 WRC plus, slightly above replacement level. So not quite ready for the major leagues yet, but still think he could conceivably be a September call-up this year. Stanley Rosella, frequent commenter and loyal viewer, brought up what we've done in the past and what we've done in this playthrough in many occasions, even with, as we just talked about, our Cy Young Award winner of signing younger players to contracts when we can potentially maybe get a good deal for them. So I have investigated that for Ortega. Unfortunately, even though he hasn't played in the majors quite yet, if we try to offer him, say, an 8-year deal, which would only buy out a year, maybe 2 years of potential free agency, he says that he's looking for $17 million at the end of the contract in 8 years, $82.5 million. Now, certainly we could probably get him for a bit less than that, but I think still guaranteeing him, say, the next 8 years for $70 million or so is not necessarily a commitment I want to make. If I could have locked him up for, say, $50 million over 8 years, that would be more interesting to me. At this point, with the situation that the A's are in financially, I think we're probably better off just paying him the minimum the next 3 years, hopefully having one cheap arbitration year. And then if he develops well, we may need to look to deal him in a few years, but we'll have gotten some cheap years out of him. And it also gives us the opportunity to potentially make things better financially with this team and maybe have a bigger budget where we'll be able to afford him. But although if he develops into a perennial all-star, we still could look back on not signing him now as perhaps a misstep. He's going to be so cheap for the next 4, maybe 5 seasons that I think given the salary pressure we're under, we're better off just kind of letting him play out his minimum years and getting into arbitration years. Clearly, we'll keep checking in, and if there's an opportunity to maybe get a better deal as he gets a little more proven and we know more about what he truly is at the major league level, it's something we'll continue to investigate. But over $10 million-ish a year, including 3 seasons when we'd have him for less than $1 million, not necessarily all that exciting to me at this point. And one final viewer comment I wanted to address before we get moving in this episode. Kevin McDowell brought up checking in on some of our former friends. We can see that our buddy Hidero Endo is on the trade block still. But before we check in on him, he wanted us to also check in on a couple of our big pitchers from last year that we couldn't afford to bring back, who we ended up getting compensatory picks for. Nick Lodolo, we've got a second rounder for him. He is 1-5 with a 4.04 ERA for the Padres. Does have 96 strikeouts and 82 1/3 innings. Put up a 1.2 WAR for them as we approach the midway point of the season, after he put up a 3 WAR for us a year ago. Signed for $9 million next year, but it is a contract that's going to be going up. Certainly could use that type of pitching performance. Maybe not the one-loss record, but certainly has done a good job in terms of his ERA, or at least a better job than some of the pitchers on our team. Kyle Bradish, who signed a 5-year, $50 million deal with the Mets. We've got a first-round compensatory pick for him. 6-3 record, 4.48 ERA, and only a .2 WAR. After 2 really nice seasons for us back-to-back, where he had over 3.5 WARs both year and led the league in ERA. He was also the winning pitcher in the clinching Game 6 of the World Series for us last year. So neither of those guys having a brilliant season. Lodolo doing better than Bradish this year. But I still think for the money that they were looking for, and with the salary situation that we're in, it was right to let them leave and get the compensatory picks that we did. And now, probably the most talked about and most controversial player through this playthrough, our old buddy Hidero Endo, who we had for 1 year, signed him as an international free agent from Japan. Traded him away after that first season with us for Colt Keith, who had a big year for us a year ago. And Endo is having a really rough year in Detroit this year. Batting average back below 200, struck out 133 times in 282 at-bats. The power numbers in terms of homers, not quite where he's been the first 2 years of his career, 14 homers and 50 ribbies. Still basically on pace to have 30 homers, over 100 ribbies, but it's only added up to a 79 WRC plus, and he's barely above replacement level. So not a great season thus far in 2030 from Blank's Endo. And while we're hoping that the return of Mr. Baldwin, with his really good defense behind the plate, will help us in the not-too-distant future, we are going to make another change to our pitching staff. Our top 3 starters, Ferris, Miller, and Chandler, have been okay this year, but certainly not great. Joe Rock did really well for us out of the bullpen, and we've promoted him into the rotation not too long ago, and he's been pretty good as a starter. 2.30 ERA over 31 1/3 innings. So we're moving him up to the number 4 starter spot, and we are putting Mason Black, who was our 4th starter, as the only full-time starter for us this year, who has a winning record at 5-4. But he does have a 5.38 ERA. He was really good for us in the stopper role a year ago, and our bullpen this year has been pretty sketchy as well. So we are going to put Mason Black back into the stopper role. And Duncan Marston, the 4th overall pick from back in 2024, who's put up a 2.82 ERA for us over 51 innings, is going to get the opportunity to be our 5th starter for some period of time. We could obviously go back to Black or Keller, who started the year in the rotation. Hunter Brown and Emmett Sheehan are also potential options for the pitching staff in the rotation if we decide we need to make another change. And we can certainly look in the trade market as well, although we're not going to have a ton of opportunity to bring on a real expensive player given the limited funds that we have right now. And we just split a 4-game series in Detroit to start out the month of July. You can see we've got 3 at home against Cleveland, a couple against the Padres, and then 3 on the road at Cleveland, 4 on the road at Houston, and 3 on the road at San Francisco over the next 2.5 weeks or so till we get to the All-Star break. And then we'll be finishing off at home against San Francisco. Kind of a odd scheduling quirk there, with the All-Star break surrounding series against a team from the other league. And then we'll finish off the month of July as we get to the trade deadline with 3 on the road in Texas. So with those games against Texas and Houston, we will have some division foes. Did get our mid-season report card today from John Fisher, and he wanted us to reach the playoffs, so certainly at 36-46, he's not going to be pleased with us. We've made a little bit of progress on attendance since the goal was given to us, although we're down this year. He's not happy with our draft record, and he keeps saying that fan interest is trending in the wrong direction. But actually, with a 52 fan interest, our fan interest is as high as it's ever been in this playthrough. So in addition to all of his other faults, Mr. Fisher does not appear to be very good at math, because it is up. It might not be as up as much as he would like, but saying it's trending in the wrong direction when it has improved shows that maybe he's not all that smart. And as we sit here just past the midway point, Pythagorean expectations, we should be a 500 team. So again, given that we've been missing 2 pretty important starters all year, the fact that we should be around 500 makes me a little less eager to punt on the season right now, even though we're certainly coming off 2 very bad months in a row. But we've been unlucky. That 7-16 record in one-run games, certainly indicative of a team that's 5 games below Pythagorean expectations. Right in the middle of the pack in the AL offensively, tied for 8th in runs scored. And we're also the middle of pack pitching-wise, 8th in runs allowed. Bullpen ERA has been steadily improving throughout the year and is actually up to 3rd at this point. The starters certainly middle of the pack. And our defense, while sound in terms of defensive efficiency and okay in terms of zone rating, has not been quite as good as it was a year ago. Certainly not having Baldwin is probably impacting that a bit, although not sure how much a catcher is really going to contribute to our zone rating. And with the midway point in the season now reached, good time to check in on this very mediocre team, and likely we'll be checking in on a bunch of mediocre performances. Our ace, Jackson Ferris, a 4-6 record, has gotten the ERA just under 4, but a 0.7 WAR this year, halfway through the season after 3.1 a year ago. Certainly has not been as effective overall as he was in the championship season. Mason Miller, the record only 2-6 a year after going 14-8. His ERA is up significantly, ERA plus and FIP minus both worse. And another guy who on pace to be about half as productive this year in terms of WAR as he was a year ago. Bubba Chandler, talked about him already, 4-8, 4.14 ERA. His 0.9 WAR is actually the highest of our top 3 starters, but still not a great number. Joe Rock has now started 6 games for us, a 5-2 record, 1.81 ERA. He's put up a 1.6 WAR for us this year, working primarily out of the bullpen, although he's in the rotation now. Pretty good deal for the minor league contract with the 1.1 salary we promised him if he made it to the majors. And Marston, 1-0 record with a hold, has struck out 65 batters in 57 and a third innings, so that's very positive. Giving up home runs has been his issue throughout the minor leagues, and he has allowed 9 homers in those 57 and a third innings that he's pitched. Barely above replacement level when you put it all together, even though some of the other numbers, particularly the ERA and the 10.2 strikeouts per 9, sound pretty good. We'll see what he did in his first start for us. 6 and a third innings, did allow 7 hits, a homer, of course, and 4 earned runs. But he did strike out 10 over those 6 and a third innings, and we did get the win against Detroit a couple of days ago. So not a bad major league debut as a starter for Mr. Marston. Chase Lee, our closer, 19 saves here as we approach the All-Star break, but the ERA of 4.18 is more than twice as high as it was a year ago. We've already talked about Mason Black, who we just moved into that stopper role, 5-5 record, 5.40 ERA. So unfortunately, he was the loser in the stopper role, either probably yesterday, I'm guessing. Probably blew that game against Detroit. Yep, took the loss, blew the save, 3 hits, 2 earned runs over just an inning of work. Emmett Sheehan, 3.15 ERA, 4-1 record. Looks like he's been respectable for us, but still only a bit above replacement level. Ben Leeper, who's had some pretty sound years for us in the past, struggling this year with a 5.33 ERA, and he has been well below replacement level for us this year. Mitch Keller started the year as our 5th starter. We moved him to the bullpen. 1-5 record, 6.08 ERA. Is striking out some guys, but he's also allowing a sickly amount of home runs and walking some batters as well. Cody Funderburk made a trade with San Francisco, thought he could help us as a lefty reliever this year, and he is a lefty reliever. He's striking out a decent amount of batters, but an ERA of close to 6 really hasn't improved from the performance he had with the Giants a year ago. Hunter Brown has been respectable for us as a long reliever, a 3.20 ERA over 59 innings, and a win above replacement. He's picked up 3 wins for us, generally pitching in lower leverage situations. And Jose Hernandez, our lefty specialist, 22 strikeouts in 18 and a third innings, but he has also allowed 10 walks, 3 homers, and 21 hits. So when you add it all up, he's been slightly below replacement. So certainly could look for some pitching help. Don't love the seasons that several of these guys have put up for us, but do expect that when we get Mr. Baldwin back, and hopefully he'll be able to begin a rehab assignment in the next couple of days, that should, on the margin, help the performance of some of these pitchers with his excellent defense and his sound framing skills. Turning now to our everyday players, Agustin Ramirez has become our starting catcher with the injury to Baldwin. And although he was very productive for us a year ago when he was playing primarily against left-handed pitching, playing just about every day has exposed him a bit. Similar number of games and at-bats to what he did over the full season a year ago. Less doubles power, and his batting average has dropped about 80 points, put up just a 52 WRC plus for us. Like his defense as a backup catcher, and like the platoon that we had a year ago with Baldwin playing primarily against righties and Ramirez playing against lefties, and hopefully we'll be able to have that duo back together within the next few days. MJ Melendez has been a DH/catcher for us this year. Hit .260 with 4 homers and 11 ribbies and 127 at-bats. 108 WRC plus, like the captain personality. Would like to get him into more of a DH/corner outfield role, and once Baldwin is ready to come back, that's certainly the only possible role for him on the team. And I think it's very conceivable that he will end up in that role because first baseman J.D. Davis, who we signed as a minor league free agent, has not been particularly effective for us, hitting .237, 4 homers and 152 at-bats, 89 WRC plus, and below replacement level given his very poor defense. So certainly think that Davis would be someone we'd move on from before Melendez once Baldwin is healthy. Tyler Soderstrom won the batting title, shockingly, a year ago. Having a pretty solid season for us again this year, although not quite as impressive as a year ago. Hitting .280, 20 homers, 61 ribbies, and a 137 WRC plus. So not quite the career year that he had last season, but certainly is not one of the problems with our offense. Willy Adames traded for this past offseason. He's hitting .264, 5 homers and 110 ribbies, 109 WRC plus, another captain personality. He's basically been a replacement level player for us. He's also unhappy, unfortunately, with the way he's being used because he is playing primarily just against left-handed pitching. We'll need to keep an eye on that. Don't want the captain to have a real negative attitude. Hopefully the team will start playing better in the coming weeks, and that will help his outlook as well. Hideki Etakawa having a rough year after a really solid rookie season, hitting just a .190 in 189 at-bats, 51 WRC plus, and he's been below replacement level. Probably going to look on the margin to take some playing time away from Arakawa and give it to Cameron Cawley, who's hitting .269 in 193 at-bats, been slightly above average in terms of his offensive performance, and has put up a WAR of above 1. Cawley is fragile physically, so probably can't be out there every day, but certainly on the margins, he's been more productive than Arakawa this year. Brian Rincon, along with Arakawa and Cawley, is the guy who's in the mix for shortstop and second base for us. Rincon regressing a bit this year, the average down to .219. Does have 12 doubles, 5 homers, 5 steals, and 5 attempts. So he's put up a 96 WRC plus when all is said and done. His good eye with a 39 walks certainly helping on that front, and a WAR of close to 2. So not quite as good as he was a year ago, similar to Soderstrom, but still not one of the major problems with this team. And we can say pretty similar things about Colt Keith as well. .297 batting average, 21 homers, 63 ribbies, 150 WRC plus, and a 3 WAR, both on pace to be a little worse than the monster year that he had for us a year ago, but still certainly in the mix with Soderstrom as our most dynamic offensive force. Turning to our outfielders, Dayan Jorge, a player we picked up in a trade last offseason, started the year in AAA, but we promoted him to the majors a little over a month ago, and he's hit .287 and 101 at-bats. Not a lot of power, but he does have that decent gap power, 7 doubles. I mean, it's acceptable gap power, acceptable speed. Not going to hit home runs, but will have some extra base hits. He's put up a 116 WRC plus for us. Pretty versatile in terms of the positions that he can play for us. Even though he's the last guy who's made this team, most recently when we had some injuries. As I talked about, I think Melendez and Davis's spots are in more jeopardy than Jorge's as Baldwin gets closer to a potential return. Center fielder Luis Lara having a second consecutive solid year for us. .268 average, 15 doubles, 5 homers, 9 stolen bases, adds up to a 105 WRC plus and a 1.6 WAR. Lawrence Butler, as he has often been throughout this playthrough, has been a disappointment for us, hitting below 200 this year with just 6 doubles and 6 homers and 254 at-bats. He's been well below replacement level, 65 WRC plus. Can't be pleased about what he's doing. Hopefully we'll get more from him over the second half of the year. And then Gabriel Gonzalez, traded for from the Giants last offseason. He's been a respectable offensive player, hitting 279, 9 doubles, 4 homers, and 183 at-bats. 108 WRC plus for the utility outfielder who is starting only against left-handed pitching. So hopefully having Baldwin back soon will help us in terms of our offense and our defense / pitching staff, and potentially getting J.D. Davis off of the roster when that happens may give us an opportunity to give a few more at-bats to the likes of Jorge, Cawley, some of the younger guys on this team, and it's hard to imagine that they'll be significantly less productive than Davis. To be fair, Davis, the 89 WRC plus is not brutal, but at this point he is only on this team for the way he can produce against left-handed pitching, and if he is a below-average offensive player, he does not bring too much else to the table for us. And we did take 2 out of 3 at home against Cleveland, so we actually have a 4-3 record through the first 7 games of July. Not great, but at least it's not as bad as things have been. And we did get Mr. Baldwin started on a rehab assignment. Only played 1 game so far, but 2 for 4 with a double. Given that he missed most of spring training, we're going to give him another couple days down in AAA just to shake off the rust, but looking very forward to having him back soon. And J.D. Davis refused a minor league assignment, so we just traded him away for someone where we wouldn't be on the hook for a major league contract. Minor league catcher Phil Clark. Certainly nothing more than organizational depth for us. Also got the Yankees to give us a very small amount of cash in return as we try to massage this thing and get ourselves a little more money available ahead of the trade deadline. So not a major move, but it does open up the roster spot that we need for the return of Drake Baldwin. And although Baldwin only played 1 additional game in Las Vegas, I did get a hit in that game as well. All the rust might not be off, but we want his glove back to help our pitching staff. And with the way this season is going, it also lets us move Ramirez into the role playing only against left-handed pitching, where hopefully he'll be more productive offensively. So even if takes another couple games for Baldwin to be back at full 100% productivity. At this point, with the fact that J.D. Davis hadn't been doing anything exceptional for us, would rather just get Baldwin right back into the lineup and see if we can maybe continue to play above 500 over the next couple of weeks until we get to the All-Star break. And we split the last 2 games of our homestand against the Padres, so we're 5-4 as we prepare for the first-year player draft. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, and even in this episode, we do have those 2 supplemental picks this year for the losses of Bradish and Lodolo. So 2 firsts and 2 seconds, but we will be picking much later than we typically have in this playthrough, picking 32nd overall in the first round this year. Taking a look at the draft order, we'll be going 32nd, and then we're number 8 in terms of the supplemental picks, so 32nd and 43rd. Certainly not expecting to get any of the top talent, but positively, the draft pool doesn't look bad. Batters, you can see there's a fair amount of players who we think are 4-star or higher potential. And the pitching pool, at least according to our scout, is perhaps even deeper. You can see we've got about 20 or so players who we think have 4-star or higher potential. So it's very possible that even though we're not going to be picking with our first pick until the 30s, that there could be someone pretty interesting for us to think about. Sergio Campos and Ben Brawner, I'm sure, certainly stand out to some of you that are more focused on college pitchers. Don't know if either of them will be around when we make our first pick. And batter-wise, Dan Erickson, at least in terms of his current skill, Juan Pendis, maybe guys in terms of everyday college players who could conceivably be available for us that might be worth looking into. But given that we're not going to be picking till number 32, we're not going to spend a lot of time here looking at players that aren't going to be available for us. So we'll just go ahead and get the draft started, and we'll auto pick until our selection and see who is actually on the board. And you can see there's still 3 of those 4.5 or star or higher everyday players available. Doesn't necessarily look like any particularly high-end college talent. Bob Day, third baseman out of Pepperdine. Looks like he could have an interesting bat. Don't like the glove at all. Joey Dale, another college player, shortstop. Okay glove. Potentially a little pop in the bat. Not necessarily in love with either of those guys. We'll take a look at some of the higher ceiling high school prospects among the batters here. We're just going to take a look at the top 5 for purposes of this video, and then we'll also take a look at some of the top pitchers. And as always, it's very helpful for me to hear what you're thinking about these players before I have to make a decision in our next episode. So we'll be finishing this episode up to give you guys some time, if you're inclined, to react to this draft and let us know where you think we should go. Interestingly, the demands of all of these players are pretty low, so we should be able to fit anyone that we're inclined to draft in reasonably well. Although given that extremely hard signability, it's not going to be shocking if they end up asking for slot rather than what they claim their demands are right now. A couple of 4-star prospects, the second baseman, Ernesto Pineda. Like the potential for the bat with 65 contact and 60 power. Speed not great, but not embarrassingly slow. A couple of positive personality traits. Not the most interesting defensive player for an infielder. Can't really play the outfield with that brutal range. The bat is interesting. I hope we find someone that I like more than him. Another second baseman, Robbie Hoffman, another guy who's not ideal defensively, a little lower in terms of his speed, does potentially have really good contact and more than acceptable power if everything works out with Mr. Hoffman. Third baseman, Deshaun Ice, a little more of a high ceiling, at least according to our scout. He is a third baseman with that 55 range, 70 arm. He could handle that position competently defensively. Speed, not great. Not the smartest fellow in the world, Mr. Old Cheese. But potential 70 contact, 60 power with that range and that arm is a decent prospect for a third baseman in my view. Mike Graves, another second base prospect, and another second base prospect who is really not an infielder. He's 6'3", could probably play first base, even though he is right-handed. He's fragile physically, but has some great personality traits with high leadership, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. and a very complete bat if he fully developed, 60 or better in everything, a bit better in power and gap power, and he does have some speed, decent bunter. He's kind of a DH slash first base type, but if that bat fully develops, I don't think you would mind him at those positions. And then the highest ceiling, at least according to our scout, is the center fielder Sergio Figueroa. Really more of a corner outfielder with those ratings. Not great speed for an outfielder, but a potentially very interesting bat. 60 contact if he fully develops, with 70 home run power and an eye that's off the charts. Could hit a lot of home runs and draw a lot of walks. So a pretty interesting offensive player. Quite honestly, to me, I think I'm probably most interested in Figueroa and Graves among this initial look. Obviously, I'll spend some time offline going through some of these lower rated prospects, but don't want to bore you with all of those details for this episode. And there are a lot of potentially 4-star or higher potential pitchers who are available. I'll just focus on the 4.5-star or better in terms of the guys that I'll automatically go through. And then before the end of the episode, I'll dig through some of these other guys that might be interesting prospects and let you know who stands out to me. Notaris Lata, 18-year-old pitching prospect, ground baller, throws in the low 90s. Looks like a marginal prospect for a first-round pitcher, looking for pretty good money. Looks like he's probably a 3.5 pitch guy. We don't think that changeup's ever going to be much of anything. Going to need to develop that cutter to ensure he has a 3-pitch arsenal. So the stuff we don't think is going to be exceptional. Do think that the movement and control could both be solid. Looks like he's a very borderline two-way player. Hopefully not the direction we end up having to go. Joel Hoffman is a reliever, very high-end reliever, whose fastball and slider could both be excellent. We think his stuff could be outstanding, potentially really good control. 18 years old, throws in the mid-90s, has a high work ethic, but he's fragile physically, could give up a decent amount of home runs, and with that 30 stamina and the 2-pitch arsenal, he is a pure reliever, so probably not a guy that we would take in the first round. Juan Camarena, 17-year-old starting pitching prospect, another ground baller type, throws in the low 90s, not particularly good at holding on runners. And unless that sinker develops, he is really most likely going to end up as a reliever. So can't say that I'm particularly intrigued by him, even though well above average stuff in control with plus movement is not a bad combination. Just don't necessarily think I'll take a righty who I think ends up as a reliever with a first-round pick. Joe Lewin is the highest ceiling prospect among the pitchers. High leadership, adaptability, low greed, decent stamina, decent at holding on runners. 17-year-old, throws in the low 90s. Going to be reliant on both that curve and sinker developing to kind of build a 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. We think if everything goes well, his stuff and his control could both be excellent and his movement could be pretty good. Left-handed starter is probably, of these 4 guys, the one that I like the most, but I certainly can't say that I am in love with him as a prospect. In most of the 4-star pitching prospects are kind of guys, just guys. The ones that I like the most, I'll show you. Kevin Frazier is the most interesting to me. 18-year-old, he throws in the mid-90s. he does potentially have a 4 to 5 pitch arsenal if everything develops, and think that his stuff could be outstanding if he completely develops. His movement and his control, both just kind of average, but he's very toolsy, and he already throws pretty hard for a high schooler. So he, among the 4-star guys, is one of the most interesting to me. The other one that's borderline interesting, but I won't end up going with, is the college pitcher, Ben Brawner. Just really don't like the personality with the low leadership, the low work ethic. He looks like he could be a useful-ish major league pitcher. Certainly a guy with 65 stuff and 65 control is nothing to turn our noses up at, particularly with the performance that we've gotten out of our rotation this year. But I don't love the fact that in his personality it's noted that the lack of work ethic impacts his development. 21 years old, don't know that he's going to even reach the potential that we think he has. That curve is still going to have to get better for him to have 3 effective major league pitches. If he's lingering in a round or two, would we take a flyer on him? Certainly something to consider, but definitely not in love with Ben Brawner. There is one other college pitcher that I am somewhat intrigued by, and that is Eric Morley out of Stanford, a 22-year-old ground ball pitcher. Potentially has a 5-pitch arsenal of average-ish major league pitches. Stuff kind of average. We think his movement and control could both be above average. His stamina and his hold runner ratings are completely average, but he has been facing a very high level of competition at Stanford, and he's done pretty well there. And he also has a perfect personality, high leadership, loyalty, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence, low financial ambitions. So the dream personality, along with the fact that he's a guy who looks like he could be helping us at the major league level in the not too distant future, makes him intriguing. Very high floor, but quite honestly, a relatively low ceiling. Best case scenario for him is probably a solid 4th starter on a good team. Does, as I noted, bring some positive things into the clubhouse, which have some value. Not a guy that I think I'm thinking about with this 1st-round pick, but with the supplemental 1st, or even better, the 2nd or the supplemental 2nd, he's someone that we'll be keeping our eye on. And taking a look at the mock draft, Mr. Morley is, at least in the mock draft, projected to go in the middle of the 2nd round to the Orioles. So could be someone for us to consider with our supplemental 1st-round pick. As I noted, would love to get him with our 2nd rounder or our supplemental 2nd rounder, but given that those picks are 14 and 20 picks behind where he's projected to go in the mock, I think if we're going to get Mr. Morley, it might have to be with our supplemental 1st-round pick, unfortunately. And I took a quick look at some of the lower-rated everyday player prospects as well. None of the 3.5-star potential guys were particularly intriguing to me. My 2 favorites, just to put them into context for viewers, Uvaldo Schmal, really just like his positional versatility. Looks like he can play almost any position on the field, which does have some value, particularly given that he's a left-handed hitter whose bat looks like it could be useful-ish if he fully develops. Not in love with him, though. Another guy that I like a bit more than the rest of the 3.5-star prospects is the shortstop Alden McFadden out of Canada. Really like the infield range. Another guy who, when we look at his defensive ratings, can play multiple positions. potentially above average gap power, home run power, and eye with decent contact. Has some positive personality traits, particularly that high work ethic and adaptability that we like to see. But certainly not in love with anyone in this draft. I tend to think my three favorites, again here, early stages of the thought process for me, are probably the center fielder Figueroa. Again, he's a corner outfielder, but he's a corner outfielder who's a left-handed hitter who potentially has world-class home run power and a world-class eye to go with decent contact. So he could certainly be a pretty interesting hitter if things work out. Second baseman Mike Graves, really intrigued by the bat, very well balanced, has some very positive personality traits. As we talked about earlier with him, think he's really a first base / DH type, and don't love that he's 18 years old and he's already fragile. But a bat that could be pretty useful. Those line drive tendencies probably play decent in Oakland. They're probably my two favorite position players. And pitching wise, as we talked about, I'm not in love with any of them. I think if we were to go with a pitcher, it's probably Joe Lewin, but he still realistically is a borderline starter with that arsenal. You're going to really need that sinker to develop because we just don't think the curve's going to be all that good. If everything works out, his stuff movement and control are all well above average. You know, if he reaches his full potential, he's a ace. But a 17-year-old high schooler, certainly no guarantees that he's going to reach that full potential. So he is intriguing to me, but I tend to think I'd probably be leaning towards one of the high school position players. Ben Brawner, I know some of you are going to like him, and I get it. He's close to being ready, and if he reaches his full potential, he's a pretty interesting pitcher. I just don't have a ton of confidence that closing in on 22 years old with that personality that he's really going to reach his full potential. So I don't think I take him. I'm sure some of you are going to educate me on why I should, and I get it. I'm not in love with any of these guys, and the high schoolers are certainly more larger rolls of the dice than a player who's pretty much developed. But as we talked about, I'm penciling in right now because I'm not in love with any of these guys. Mr. Morley with our supplemental first round pick. He doesn't have as high a ceiling as the other college pitcher, but I think he's got a much better chance of reaching whatever his ceiling is with that personality. And we could get him, 10 or 8 or 12 picks from now whenever our supplemental pick is actually up. Pretty confident that he'll be around. Could go college pitcher and college pitcher if I really wanted to, but I don't think I'm inclined to do that. If Brawner's personality was better, he'd be a lot more intriguing to me, but I hate to pick a college guy who needs a decent amount of additional development to really be an effective major leaguer with a personality that indicates he might not reach that. So tend to think I'm leaning towards Figueroa or maybe Graves, but I certainly haven't made a decision and don't have extremely strong opinions on this draft. So I probably can be swayed more this time around than sometimes in the drafts and the IAFA periods where I've got pretty strong views. So if you've got a strong view on what we should do in the draft, would love to hear it in the comments, and we will tackle the draft in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.